Hello and welcome to this mid to late game, 1895 to 1955 Loco summary and best usage guide for Railroad Tycoon 2 in terms of purchase cost, PC, maintenance cost, MC, acceleration, AC, not armor class, reliability, absolute speeds at 75, 100 and 300 tons at 0 and 4% inclines respectively, both in terms of absolute speed and speed per unit cost. So this would be 75% at 0 absolute speed, 75% at 4 absolute speed, 150 at 0, 150 at 4, 100 or 300 at 0, 300 at 4 for absolute speeds, and then for speeds per unit costs the same. The overall is considered to be an aggregate of all of these, so it's basically how good an all-rounder is it. Just because something's kind of average to slightly crappy in terms of overall doesn't mean that you won't want to use it as either a passenger express or as a bulk carrier, just that it can't do both roles well. The colour scheme for good to bad or bad to good is sort of the browny red all the way up to blue, Roy Biv. And because this age has so many different trains, we've had to break this this section up into different pages with a different page for the different kinds of fuel. So we'll start off with diesel. The diesel trains do not become available until very late in this age. Yep, the last sort of 10 years of this age, and therefore they tend to perform very well. Also, the diesels are just kind of strong. They have fuel cost issues, but they tend to be strong. Now, to begin with, the F3A and B types, or A plus B because it's a sort of two trains attached to each other doing the job of a single train. But anyway, purchase cost, not amazing. Maintenance cost, okay. Acceleration, quite good. Reliability, okay. It has good speed on the flats, not kind of average speed once you consider going at grades. That said, because the maintenance cost is only average, and those speeds are reasonable, it actually does quite okay for specific speeds per units cost. And overall, therefore, you can recommend it as it does a decent job for priority haul passenger and mail, and it does quite a good job for bulk good carrying. Can recommend. Next, the Alco PA1, available a year later. Same sort of thing here, although you're losing a bit of acceleration and reliability, but you are gaining a bit of absolute speed on flats. This basically means you're probably gonna give it a bit higher overall rating in terms of that it can do the job of being a passenger and mail express a bit better, and it doesn't really get any crappier at the other things. Next, the F9. Quite expensive to both purchase and maintain. Decent, well, above average acceleration, average reliability. That said, it is very, very good for speed. And even though it has kind of crappy maintenance, because it's so good at speed, it does a decent job at speed per unit cost, and therefore can be highly recommended for almost everything except the highest loads. For bulk goods haulage at the highest loads up the steepest inclines. And you get the same sort of story for the GP9, except that you aren't quite as expensive, much better maintenance cost, and slightly better reliability in exchange for some acceleration. The next classes of trains, we move on to the electrics of this age. And compared to before, the previous age where we only had the one, the Bobo, now the electrics gain access to a large portion of the market. So we start with the Bobo. The Bobo is about the same as before in that it's made an improvement in maintenance cost. Before, the Bobo had not great purchase and maintenance cost stats, but in this age, it does a much better job of that. That said, its acceleration and reliability go down comparatively as it was the first of the electrics, and now they sort of learn how to do a better job of building and maintaining them, so they tend to have better stats in terms of that. It's you can't really recommend it compared to everything else, but it is available from the start of the age. So, it's got that whole thing going with, if it's the first thing you get access to and you got access to nothing else, you're going to have to roll with it. We get the BE 462. It makes significant gains in terms of acceleration and reliability over the Bobo. Somewhat better in terms of purchase and maintenance costs. That said, it's slower. So you're not going to want to be using this for passenger and mail. It still does a good job for bulk haulage. You might want to consider using it to do bulk haulage. The EE33, same sort of story, although not as good acceleration. in exchange for a little bit more speed on the flats. That also results in it having slightly better flats stats for goods per unit's cost, and it performs very well in terms of unit cost for hauling things over mountains. Then we get the 1045. The 1045 makes the improvement on the previous of returning to decent acceleration, although only, well, it makes a trade-off for that for reliability. Not so amazingly quick on the flats, decent at grade, and in terms of performance per unit's cost, look at that blob of blue. That tells you that heavy, well, for modest grades, as long as you're carrying a big to really big load, this is going to do you a good job, and therefore I can highly recommend it. Finally, we come to the train of a class in a class of its own, the GG1. Yes, it is a bit expensive. It has average maintenance costs, so you can't say it does amazingly here, but it has good acceleration and absolutely outstanding reliability. It has amazing speed for low, medium, and heavy on flats. Amazing speed at incline for low, at least for low loads. For medium and heavy loads, there are workhorses that can do the heavier inclines a bit better, but it does those all so well and at such a reasonable maintenance, such a not bad maintenance, that it performs extremely well also then in the speed per unit cost category. And you know, you could almost put another category beyond here that is the GG1 category. This train is just so good, it is in a class of its own. Next, the E18. Compared to all that's come before, you've got about on par, slightly better than average purchase and maintenance costs, acceleration and reliability. You are compared to if we ignore the GG1, because we kind of have to make a fair comparison to any other train in the game, you're making gains in terms of your speeds, your absolute speeds, except for the highest grade, except for at high grade for medium to heavy loads. And therefore, you can say, yeah, it does okay. It's an okay train to use. The AE84. The AE84, about the same in terms of your purchase and reliability stats. You lose a little bit of low speed flats, but you gain incline and heavy load capacity compared to those that have come before. So as long as you aren't trying to do passenger express on a flat, it probably does a pretty decent job. And you can say, yeah, it's recommended. It's recommended for those. The 1020, available 2 years later. You're not making too much difference about these. Maybe a bit of an improvement in reliability compared to what you've seen before, aside from the GG1. the ever-present exclusion that you have to make. Absolute speeds. It's taken a bit of a step back compared to that which has come before. A little bit, but it has gained at low load incline. And considering the reliability and acceleration, you can say it's recommended. Next, the Tgv Prototype. Hugely costly in both ways. And it doesn't have amazing reliability. It does have okay acceleration. It is absolutely amazing at flats. If you have a low load and zero incline, this thing will absolutely rocket along. Similarly, it does very well when there's no incline for medium and heavy loads, but as soon as you give it even the slightest sniff of an incline, this train falls over, and therefore it cannot be considered a good all-rounder, but you may find use for it at Passenger and Mail Express on zero incline. So don't discount it just because of that. And finally, the E69. We return to reasonable maintenance costs from the horrendous stats that we saw of the Tgv Prototype. That said, it doesn't actually have great reliability compared to all that's come before, even if you exclude the GG1. Not great on your zero incline work, quite reasonable for incline work. And once you combine that with its good maintenance cost, you've actually got something that does a very good job for heavy haul across mountains and so forth, and therefore you can recommend it as okayish all round, okayish all round and good overall, because, well, okay-ish all round, and because it does that one thing very well, just keep in mind that you should probably be using it for that job. Next, the choo-choo trains, the steamy engines again. We start off with the Mogul, which was doing all right last age, but this age it doesn't compare so favourably to its the rest of the cohort. Still decent purchase and maintenance costs. Its reliability isn't as great as its cohort. Its speeds don't look as great as they once were, especially once you get to heavy things and heavy things per unit cost. The Atlantic used to be the king of flat speeds in the previous age, but now it's sort of, it's okay, but once you factor in that maintenance cost isn't the best, you might want to consider something else. The Camelback still does a reasonable job in terms of extremely heavy loads, especially once you move to heavy loads at incline per unit cost. So, okay-ish. The Pacific is maintaining its high-speed flats rating. Doesn't do poorly. It hasn't decreased too much here, but because of the high maintenance cost, it doesn't perform great for load haulage. You're going to want to be exclusively using this for flat passenger work. The 010 similarly, high maintenance costs, and a similar-ish profile in that it's better at flats, not so great at inclines. I'd say stick with the previous one, honestly. Stick with the Pacific. The 262 Prairie. The Prairie is lovely in that we make some pretty nice gains in terms of maintenance costs. Not the best for acceleration, but reliability and maintenance cost plus reasonable-ish speeds means that its speed per unit cost is quite okay. And it's certainly not something that it's hard to use well. You should find uses for it in haulage, in flat haulage. Only flat haulage, though. The D16SB, lovely purchase and maintenance costs, not good accelerations, and lovely reliability. Crappy speeds, but that maintenance cost means that even though it's got crappy absolute speeds, it does okay for everything except the heaviest loads up the most unsensible inclines. So it's okay for heavy load. It's okay for bulk load carrying, not something that you're going to want to be using for passengers and mail. It can be okay. The 210 Class 13H. Maintenance cost has once again, we're seeing one of the gas guzzlers, or the steam guzzlers as it is. Reasonable acceleration and maintenance. Slightly crappier than average flat work. Does a bit better once you consider being on a grade. But because of the high maintenance, you can't really expect to be using it too well for bulk haulage. Overall, The Ursa 060, or USRA, but I like rearranging it into Ursa. Decent purchase and maintenance costs, as well as reliability. It's about, the average profile we see here, that acceleration is maybe not necessarily the best. Absolute speeds, about on par with what you've seen before. But because the maintenance cost is doing all right, it means it does kind of okay-ish for speeds per unit maintenance cost, giving it an overall only slightly worse than average sort of rating. The 282 Mikado, available one whole year later. A bit more expensive and with very significant maintenance costs, but good acceleration and reliability, as well as quite decent speeds everywhere. It doesn't matter how heavy a load or how high a grading you're giving it, it's going to do quite reasonably for passenger and mail delivery. And it's one way that you can avoid needing to swap over to electrics. The electric trains are going to have better speed stats here, but you can still get a decent speed stat without needing to electrify your track, which is a high cost. Next, in terms of speeds per unit maintenance cost, not so great on the flats. There are better options on the flats, but as soon as you give it even a reasonable amount of grade, especially for heavy hauls, it's going to do quite well. So it does okay. It does okay, does the old Makaido. Then the 460 Class B12. Purchase cost and maintenance cost okay-ish. Acceleration nice. Reliability okay-ish. Decent for low and medium loads as long as you're not on a grade. As soon as you make it a bit heavier or a bit more grady, it slows down. And because the maintenance cost is okay, that means that for on the flats, as long as you're not giving it too heavy a thing, it does an okay job. You can use this okay-ish. Then the second of the URSAs, the USRA 080, you have made a bit of a gain compared to the older URSA in terms of acceleration, but at the cost of some reliability. It improves on that in terms of carrying up an incline, but only marginally. So, you know, not a big gain there. I say to the URSA. Part 2. Next, the second part of the steam trains of this age, because it's such a long period and there are so many different steam trains developed. The 440. Well, no, we moved on. We'd just done the second of the URSAs. So here's the next batch of trains, of the steam trains. We've got the Mallard. Now, the Mallard does not have lovely maintenance cost, nor does it have lovely purchase cost, nor does it have lovely reliability. It does have nice acceleration, and it does have good flat speeds, especially for low to medium loads. Heavier loads on the flats, it can still do a good job, but it's starting to drop away a little bit. And as soon as you give it some grade, especially with the heavier loads, it falls over. Now, its speed is just so good on the flats that even though its maintenance cost isn't great, it still maintains a good speed per unit cost on the flats. That said, the same as for its load work absolute speed, you're not going to be wanting to use it on incline. Overall, okay, it's got that good use. It's going to serve you well if you've got a nice flat to do some passenger and mail delivery, or even some bulk goods on flats, but not too heavy. If you get too heavy, it's gonna be like average, not good. Now, the 484 Daylight. The Daylight does not have lovely maintenance costs. No siree bob. Nor does it have lovely reliability. It does have a significantly improved ability compared to most of what has come before to deal with heavy loads up an incline. So if you're keeping to steam trains and wanting to deal with loads up an incline at speed, absolute speed, you may want to consider this. But because of that maintenance cost, it means it only averages out to kind of average-ish once you are considering specific costs. It does, you can't knock it too much. It does okay. The Hudson, also not great purchase cost, but at least it isn't as terrible in terms of maintenance costs. That said, for that you are losing a bit of acceleration and gaining a bit of reliability, as well as losing a bit of incline capacity compared to the Daylight. So they're about the same. If you aren't doing inclines, probably stick to the Hudson. The 464J3A Streamliner. We get to among the biggest, most expensivest of trains to run. Him and the big boy who follows. Purchase cost not great. Decent to good acceleration. Horrid reliability. But it's good on your flats. It does okay at incline. That said, once you account for its maintenance costs, it doesn't become so good once you consider it a specific cost. So you're going to want to be using it for passenger and heavy haul on passenger and mail from light through to heavy. Not so much for your bulk goods carrying. Your non-time constrained transport, especially at the highest grades and the heaviest loads. The 4884 Big Boy. Horrendous costs, horrendous reliability, not amazing purchase costs, decent acceleration. Speed for low loads, not great. But that's not the right use for the Big Boy. The Big Boy's correct use is medium to heavy loads, especially up a hill. It even does okay for absolute, like you can use this to do passengers and mail, as long as there's enough of a hill to make it worthwhile. Once you take those reasonable to good speeds and divide by your maintenance cost that is bad, we see that it is not good for light to medium loads, but for heavy loads, on grade, it does well. So, red overall, as long as you're doing either an extremely long passenger train up a hill or bulk good carrying up a hill, it can do okay. The 444 T1, the Terminator, we've gained a bunch of acceleration and we've gained reliability compared to some of the unreliable stuff that we've just seen before it. That said, it is still quite expensive to run in terms of fuel. Lovely flat and lovely absolute speeds except for the heaviest loads upgrade. And because the maintenance cost is only kind of fairly bad, not terribly bad, it does okay-ish. You know, it does okay-ish to a little bit bad for specific speeds there. For specific speeds per maintenance cost there. Overall, okay-ish. Okay-ish. If you're going to be using it for reasonably flat passenger work, you'll find it to be okay. Good luck.